There is a reason you're hearing these words right now, and it is not something random or accidental, even if it feels that way on the surface. Something within you has been quietly shifting, almost imperceptibly at first, like a subtle movement beneath still water, and that shift has led you here. You may not yet fully understand what is happening, but part of you already senses that something is different. Not in the world around you, not in the people you interact with, but in you. And when something changes within, the entire structure of your reality begins to rearrange itself in response, even if that process initially appears as confusion, chaos, or uncertainty. Perhaps lately you have felt overwhelmed, as if life is unraveling in ways that don't seem to make sense. Situations feel unstable, emotions feel heavier, and the direction you once trusted now feels unclear. But what if this instability is not a sign of things going wrong, but rather a sign that something deeper is reorganizing itself beneath the surface? What if what you are experiencing is not a collapse, but a transformation in progress? Many people encounter this stage and misinterpret it as failure, as loss, or as something to escape from. They retreat, they resist, or they numb themselves to avoid the discomfort. But in doing so, they miss the deeper meaning hidden within the experience. The psyche does not transform loudly at first. It begins with subtle disturbances, small cracks in the structures you once relied on. The beliefs that once felt certain begin to feel incomplete. The goals that once motivated you begin to lose their emotional weight. Even your sense of identity may begin to feel less solid than before. This can be deeply unsettling because the mind prefers stability, even if that stability is limiting. But the soul, if we can call it that, seeks expansion. And expansion often requires the dissolution of what can no longer contain who you are becoming. One of the first signs of this inner transformation is the sudden urge to question everything you once accepted without hesitation. You begin to ask yourself questions that did not seem necessary before. Who am I, beyond the roles I have been playing? What do I actually want, beyond what I was taught to want? Am I living in alignment with something real within me, or am I simply following patterns that were never truly mine? These questions are not random thoughts. They are signals. They are openings. They are the psyche beginning to turn inward, searching for something more authentic beneath the surface of conditioned identity. At first, this questioning can feel like losing your footing. The familiar structures that once gave you a sense of direction begin to dissolve. And with that dissolution comes uncertainty. But uncertainty, in this context, is not a void. It is a space being created. It is the clearing away of what no longer fits, making room for something that has not yet fully emerged. In the language of Carl Jung, this process could be understood as the beginning of individuation, the movement toward becoming more whole, more integrated, more aligned with the deeper self rather than the surface persona. And this is where the experience becomes paradoxical. What feels like disorientation is actually orientation at a deeper level. What feels like losing yourself is, in many ways, the beginning of finding yourself. The old structures must loosen their grip so that new awareness can take shape. The mind may resist this because it prefers clarity and certainty, but the deeper psyche operates differently. It unfolds in layers, often through contradiction, often through tension. As this process continues, you may begin to notice that your connection to the past starts to shift. Things that once felt meaningful may now feel distant, almost as if they belong to a different version of you. This does not happen suddenly. It is gradual, almost quiet, like a fading echo. Activities that once brought joy may now feel empty. Conversations that once engaged you may now feel superficial. Even relationships that once felt central to your life may begin to lose their emotional resonance. This can be one of the most confusing aspects of transformation because it creates a sense of disconnection. You may wonder why you no longer feel the same way about things that once mattered to you. You may question whether something is wrong, whether you are becoming detached in an unhealthy way. But this disconnection is not a loss of feeling. It is a shift in alignment. You're no longer resonating with what you once did because you're no longer the same person who needed those things in the same way. Jung might describe this as the shedding of an outdated persona, the social identity that once helped you navigate the world but no longer reflects your deeper reality. And as the persona begins to loosen, the shadow, the unconscious aspects of the self, begins to emerge more clearly. This is not a comfortable process because the shadow contains everything that has been denied, suppressed, or ignored. But it also contains potential, energy, and parts of yourself that have never been fully expressed. As these layers begin to surface, you may find yourself experiencing a mixture of emotions that do not seem to fit neatly together. There may be moments of clarity followed by moments of doubt, moments of excitement followed by moments of fear. This is not inconsistency. It is integration in progress. The psyche is attempting to reconcile different aspects of itself, and that process naturally involves tension. At the same time, your perception of what truly matters may begin to change. The things that once seemed important, status, approval, external validation, may begin to lose their significance, not because they are inherently meaningless, but because they no longer satisfy the deeper questions that have begun to arise within you. You may find yourself drawn toward experiences that feel more authentic, more aligned, even if they are less conventional or less socially rewarded. This shift in values is often subtle at first, but once it begins, it becomes difficult to ignore. You start to see through certain illusions that once felt real. You begin to recognize patterns in your own behavior, in your relationships, in the way you have been navigating your life. And with that recognition comes a choice, not an immediate dramatic decision, but a gradual reorientation. A movement towards something that feels more true, even if it is not yet fully defined. There may also be a period where you feel alone in this process, not necessarily physically alone, but psychologically separate from those around you. This happens because your internal framework is changing, while the external environment may remain the same. The conversations, expectations, and dynamics that once felt normal may now feel misaligned with your evolving perspective. This can create a sense of distance even in familiar environments. But this distance is not meant to isolate you. It is meant to create space for self-awareness. It is in this space that you begin to hear something that was always present, but often drowned out by noise. A quieter voice, not loud, not forceful, but steady. This is what many refer to as intuition, not in a mystical sense necessarily, but as a form of inner knowing that arises when you begin to align more closely with yourself. At first, this inner guidance may be difficult to trust. The mind is accustomed to relying on logic, on external validation, on clear evidence. But intuition does not operate in that way. It presents itself as a sense of direction, a feeling of resonance or dissonance, a subtle clarity that does not always come with explanation. And as you begin to listen to it, even hesitantly, you may notice that your decisions start to feel different, less forced, more aligned. This does not mean that uncertainty disappears. It means that your relationship to uncertainty changes. Instead of seeing it as something to avoid, you begin to see it as part of the process, as something that accompanies growth rather than contradicts it. And in that shift, something important happens. You begin to trust yourself in a way you may not have before. As this trust develops, you may also feel a growing desire to expand, not just externally, but internally. A desire to understand yourself more deeply, to explore ideas that challenge your previous assumptions, to engage with experiences that stimulate growth rather than reinforce comfort. This is not simply curiosity. It is a form of psychological hunger, a movement toward greater awareness. You may find yourself drawn to books, conversations, or experiences that reflect this shift, not because they are trendy or popular, but because they resonate with something within you that is seeking expression. And through this exploration, you begin to uncover aspects of yourself that were previously hidden or underdeveloped. At the same time, you may also feel the need to confront parts of yourself that you once avoided. Old patterns, unresolved emotions, limiting beliefs. These are not resurfacing to burden you. They are resurfacing because you're now in a position to see them more clearly, to understand them, and potentially to transform them. This process is not always comfortable. In fact, it often involves moments of discomfort, even resistance. But that discomfort is not an indication that something is wrong. It is an indication that something is changing, that the psyche is reorganizing itself in a way that allows for greater coherence, greater authenticity, greater alignment. And as all of this unfolds, there may be a quiet but persistent feeling in the background, a sense that something significant is approaching, not necessarily something external, but something internal, a shift, a threshold, a movement into a different phase of your life. You may not be able to define it clearly. You may not know exactly what it looks like, but you can feel it, a combination of anticipation and uncertainty, of fear and excitement. And that feeling, as subtle as it may be, is not meaningless. It is the psyche recognizing that it is in transition. And as this inner shift deepens, something else begins to happen, something that is often misunderstood at first. You begin to feel a growing urge to distance yourself from certain people, environments, or dynamics that once felt normal, even necessary. It is not always dramatic. It does not always come with conflict. Sometimes it is simply a quiet recognition that something no longer fits, that something no longer resonates in the same way it once did. You may notice that certain conversations feel draining rather than engaging, that certain interactions leave you feeling diminished rather than supported. Behaviors that you once tolerated without question may now feel heavy, even intrusive. This is not because you have become more critical or less patient. It is because your internal standards are changing. You're becoming more aware of what aligns with your energy and what does not. There is a moment in this process where you begin to understand that maintaining certain connections requires you to remain in a version of yourself that you are no longer willing to inhabit. And that realization, while quiet, carries significant weight because it asks something of you. It asks you to choose between familiarity and authenticity, between comfort and growth. Letting go is rarely easy, even when it's necessary. There is often a sense of grief involved, not only for the people or situations you're releasing, but for the version of yourself that existed within those dynamics. You may find yourself remembering what once felt meaningful, questioning whether you're making the right decision, wondering if you're losing something important. But what you're actually doing is creating space. Space for something more aligned, more supportive, more reflective of who you are becoming. In Jungian terms, this could be seen as part of the individuation process, where the individual gradually separates from unconscious patterns and begins to form a more integrated identity. And in that process, certain attachments naturally fall away, not as a punishment, but as a consequence of growth. At the same time, you may begin to notice subtle changes in the way you perceive others. You become more sensitive to inconsistencies between what people say and what they feel. You begin to recognize patterns of projection, where individuals attribute their own unacknowledged emotions or conflicts onto others. This awareness does not necessarily make interactions easier, but it does make them clearer. You start to see dynamics for what they are, rather than for what you hoped they might be. And with that clarity comes a different kind of strength, not a forceful or confrontational strength, but a quiet stability. You begin to understand that you do not need to engage with every dynamic, that you do not need to respond to every behavior, that you have the ability to choose where your energy goes. This is not detachment in the sense of indifference. It is discernment. It is the ability to recognize what is worth your attention and what is not. As this discernment develops, your relationship with yourself begins to shift in a profound way. You start to rely less on external validation and more on internal alignment. Decisions become less about what is expected and more about what feels true. This does not mean that every choice becomes easy, but it does mean that your choices begin to reflect a deeper coherence. And in that coherence, something important emerges, a sense of self that is not entirely dependent on external circumstances, a sense of stability that does not collapse when things around you change. This is not a fixed state. It is a process. But it is a process that gradually leads you toward a different way of being. You may also begin to notice that your emotional responses change. Situations that once triggered strong reactions may now feel less overwhelming, not because you have become numb, but because you are beginning to understand those reactions more clearly. You are less identified with them. You can observe them without being completely consumed by them. This is one of the subtle but powerful effects of increased self-awareness. The space between stimulus and response begins to expand. And in that space, you have the opportunity to choose how you respond, rather than reacting automatically based on old patterns. At the same time, there may still be moments of doubt, moments where you question whether you're moving in the right direction, whether the changes you are experiencing are leading somewhere meaningful. This is a natural part of the process. Transformation is not linear. It involves phases of clarity and phases of uncertainty. But the presence of doubt does not invalidate the process. It is simply part of it. As you continue to move through this phase, you may begin to notice something else, something more subtle, but equally significant. Your perception of time and progress begins to shift. You are less focused on immediate outcomes and more attuned to long-term alignment. You begin to understand that not everything needs to happen quickly, that some processes unfold at their own pace. This can be challenging in a world that often emphasizes speed, productivity, and constant achievement. But the kind of transformation you are undergoing does not operate on that timeline. It unfolds according to a different rhythm, one that is less concerned with external validation and more focused on internal coherence. And as you begin to align with that rhythm, your experience of life begins to change, not necessarily in dramatic, external ways, but in the way you relate to what is happening. There is less urgency, less pressure to control every outcome, and more openness to what is emerging. This does not mean passivity. It means participation without attachment. It means engaging with life while also allowing space for uncertainty. And in that balance, something new begins to take shape. You may start to notice moments of clarity that seem to come unexpectedly, insights that arise without deliberate effort, connections that reveal themselves in ways you did not anticipate. These are not random occurrences. They are reflections of the internal reorganization that is taking place. As your inner world becomes more coherent, your perception of the outer world begins to reflect that coherence. At this stage, it is important to understand that the process you are experiencing is not about becoming perfect. It is not about eliminating all conflict or uncertainty. It is about becoming more integrated, more aware of the different aspects of yourself and how they interact, more capable of holding complexity without needing to reduce it to something simple. Jung described this as the integration of opposites, the ability to hold both light and shadow, both strength and vulnerability, both certainty and doubt. This integration does not remove tension, but it transforms it. It allows tension to become a source of growth rather than a source of fragmentation. And this is where the deeper transformation begins to stabilize. Not in the sense that everything becomes clear or resolved, but in the sense that you become more capable of navigating complexity without losing yourself within it. You begin to understand that growth is not about becoming someone entirely new, but about becoming more fully who you already are, about uncovering aspects of yourself that were always present but not fully expressed, about aligning your actions, your thoughts, and your values in a way that feels coherent. This alignment does not happen all at once. It develops gradually through small choices, through moments of awareness, through the willingness to face discomfort rather than avoid it. And over time, those small shifts accumulate into something significant. You may also begin to notice that your interactions with others start to change, not because you're trying to change them, but because you're showing up differently. You are less reactive, more grounded, more consistent in your responses. And that consistency can have an effect on the dynamics around you. Some relationships may deepen as a result of this shift. Others may fade. This is not something you need to force. It is something that unfolds naturally as your internal state changes. People who resonate with your current state will be drawn closer. Those who do not may gradually move away. And while this can sometimes feel like loss, it is also a form of alignment. It is the external world reflecting the changes that are taking place within you. As you reach this point, there is often a moment, not a dramatic revelation, but a quiet recognition, a sense that you are no longer the same person who began this process, that something fundamental has shifted, even if you cannot fully articulate it. You may still have questions, you may still face challenges, but your relationship to those questions and challenges is different. There is less fear, less urgency, and more trust. Not blind trust, but a grounded sense that you can navigate what comes next. And that is perhaps one of the most important aspects of this transformation. It is not about predicting the future or controlling every outcome. It is about developing the capacity to meet whatever arises with awareness, with stability, with a sense of inner coherence. You're not at the end of a journey. You are at the beginning of a different way of experiencing that journey, a way that is less driven by unconscious patterns and more guided by conscious awareness. And if you're hearing this now, if something in these words resonates with your current experience, then it is worth considering that this is not something accidental, that the process you're moving through has a direction, even if that direction is not yet fully visible. There is a kind of intelligence within the psyche, a movement toward greater integration, greater awareness, greater wholeness. And while that movement may not always feel comfortable, it is purposeful. You are not being pulled apart without reason. You are being reorganized. You are not losing yourself. You are encountering parts of yourself that were previously hidden. You are not moving away from your path. You are beginning to see it more clearly. And as this clarity continues to unfold, you may find that what once felt uncertain begins to make sense in a different way. Not as a fixed answer, but as a deeper understanding, a recognition that the discomfort, the questioning, the disconnection, all of it was part of a larger process. A process that is still unfolding. And perhaps the most important thing to understand is this. You do not need to rush it. You do not need to force it. You do not need to have all the answers right now. What you are experiencing is already in motion. It is already shaping you in ways that are not always immediately visible. Your role is not to control every aspect of it. Your role is to remain aware, to remain open, to engage with the process rather than resist it. Because what is emerging is not something external that you need to chase. It is something internal that you're becoming. And once that process reaches a certain depth, you begin to realize something that changes the way you see everything. You were never simply reacting to life. You were participating in your own transformation. And that transformation is still unfolding.